It was morning. The first rays of the sun had bathed the entire city in a golden hue. Everything appeared perfectly normal, yet no one had any inkling that a young man's life was about to change completely in a matter of minutes. As usual, the crowded metro was making its way toward the next station, and it was so packed inside that people were struggling even to remain standing. Amidst this throng stood an ordinary-looking young man. Fatigue was clearly visible on his face, as if he hadn't had a proper rest in days. Suddenly, the color drained from his face. He clutched his chest and whispered, I'm dying." His condition was deteriorating by the second, yet the metro sped on. Just then, an announcement came over the speakers. "This station is Yahello. Doors will open on the left." As the train came to a halt, passengers hurriedly began to disembark. Everyone was in a rush to reach their destination. The crowd jostled and pushed, and no one noticed the young man's worsening condition. But little did anyone know that this very moment was destined to become the biggest turning point of his life. The crowd was somehow making its way out of the metro. Suddenly, the young man spotted an empty seat amidst the crowd. He said to himself, "In such a crowd, how can a seat be empty?" He found it quite strange. However, he was feeling so unwell that instead of overthinking it, he decided to go and sit in that seat immediately. As soon as he sat down, a look of relief became clearly visible on his face. Taking a deep breath, he said to himself, "Finally, luck is on my side today. Perhaps this is what true happiness feels like." But he had absolutely no idea that this was no ordinary seat. It was then that the story revealed the young man's true identity for the first time. His name was Manager Hyun Min. Age 33 years, he had been a top performer in his studies since his school days. Through hard work and dedication, he had secured a managerial position at a prestigious company. From the outside, his life appeared perfect. A good job, a brilliant career, and the image of success in the eyes of others. But the reality was quite different. He did not know that this mysterious seat he had found on the metro today was about to steer his entire life in a direction he had never even imagined. Now, the story takes us into Hyun Min's past. He was a manager at a major company where new challenges awaited him every day. Whenever a project stalled, the entire team would look toward their senior executives with hopeful eyes. But every time, they received the same answer: "Give this task to Hyun Min." Everyone in the company believed that if even an impossible project could succeed, it would only be because of Hyun Min. After all, throughout the office, he was known as the man who could accomplish even the seemingly impossible. Gradually, he acquired a reputation. If a task required success, Hyun Min was the only one who could shoulder the responsibility. Yet no one ever stopped to consider the immense pressure mounting on him as he repeatedly turned the impossible into the possible. Working ceaselessly day and night, attending countless meetings, and facing never-ending deadlines had turned his life into that of a machine. He found himself thinking, "Yes, I am Hyun Min." But this time his body was beginning to give way. His breathing grew rapid, darkness clouded his vision, and he realized he had taken on a burden far exceeding his limits. Suddenly, everything before his eyes began to blur. Startled, he muttered, Did I fall asleep?" Little did he know that what was about to happen next was not part of a dream, but was destined to become the most mysterious turning point of his life. When Hyun Min opened his eyes again, the first thought that crossed his mind was, "No, did I miss my stop?" He looked around frantically. Just moments ago, he had been in a crowded subway, but now the scene before him had completely changed. He couldn't tell if he had truly woken up, or if he was still having some bizarre dream. As Hyun Min looked up, he was struck dumb with shock. Towering cliffs surrounded him on all sides, and only a small patch of sky was visible overhead. He was no longer on the subway. Instead, he was sitting on a stone chair in the middle of a deep, mysterious canyon. His mind went completely numb. Where on earth am I? Just as he was trying to make sense of his situation, a terrifying scream echoed through the area. He glanced ahead, and the sight that met his eyes made his blood run cold. Dozens of hideous green monsters brandishing weapons were charging straight toward him from the bottom of the stairs. Their red eyes betrayed only one thing: a thirst for blood. His hands began to tremble, his breathing quickened, and he started backing away in a panic. He couldn't tell if this was a dream or if he had truly ended up in another world. But one thing was crystal clear: if he didn't act within the next few seconds, those monsters would tear him apart. Hyun Min sank to his knees, clutching his head in pain. A single question kept swirling in his mind: "Am I really dead?" After a moment of reflection, he answered himself, "It seems I either died from overwork or I've completely lost my mind." He couldn't believe that the life of an ordinary office worker would suddenly end in such a terrifying place, but then those terrifying screams began to echo from all directions once again. He looked up to see dozens of goblins surrounding him. Escaping from their midst was now nearly impossible. The color drained from Hyun Min's face, his throat was parched, his body trembled with fear, and his mind had gone completely numb. He realized that this was no dream, this was reality, and if he didn't find a way out right now, these ferocious goblins would devour him alive the very next moment. Oh Hyun Min composed himself and began to observe the creatures closely. Green skin, long pointed ears, and their faces were terrifying enough to make any human soul tremble. After staring at them for a few moments, his anxiety deepened. He spoke in a low voice, "Yes, there is no doubt. These really are goblins." Memories of stories he had read and video games he had played in his childhood came flooding back. They looked exactly the same green skin and the same ferocious gaze. Oh Hyun Min was now absolutely certain that the creatures standing before him were the very same goblins he had always seen in movies, anime, and video games, but the very next moment, something happened that left him utterly stunned. All the goblins standing before him suddenly dropped to their knees and shouted in unison, "Our master has arrived! Hail to our lord!" The entire cave echoed with their voices. Oh Hyun Min's eyes went wide with shock. Because these goblins weren't just screaming, they were speaking clear, fluent Korean just like humans. His mind went numb. He muttered to himself, "Wait, what? Why are they talking about me?" He couldn't fathom why they were all calling him their master. Was this some huge misunderstanding? Or did he possess an identity in this mysterious world that even he was unaware of? Just then, the crowd of goblins began to slowly advance toward him. And with every step they took, Oh Hyun Min's heart pounded faster and faster. The very next moment, a small goblin from the horde suddenly dashed rapidly toward Oh Hyun Min. Oh Hyun Min's heart began to pound. He felt as though the small monster was about to attack him, but just as the goblin reached right in front of him, the small goblin slowly approached Oh Hyun Min and stopped in front of him. But instead of attacking, it held out a glowing red fruit with both hands and spoke in an innocent voice, "My master, please, eat this." Oh Hyun Min was left completely stunned for a moment. He gently took the fruit in his hand and examined it closely. He wondered to himself, what on earth is this? He had never seen a fruit like this in his entire life. A faint red glow emanated from the fruit's surface, as if a mysterious power lay hidden within. The longer he gazed at it, the more he realized that this was no ordinary fruit. He could feel a faint surge of energy coursing through his hands. Just then, the other goblins standing nearby began looking at him with excitement. There was no fear in their eyes, and instead, hope and respect were clearly visible. It seemed as though they were eagerly waiting for their master to take the first bite of that mysterious fruit. And now only one question echoed in Oh Hyun Min's mind. If I eat this fruit, what exactly will happen to me? The small goblin was still standing there, holding out that mysterious fruit with both hands. His innocent eyes held only one plea. "My master, please accept this." Oh Hyun Min glanced at the fruit once more, then looked at the entire goblin army standing before him. Every gaze was fixed upon him. He thought to himself, if I don't eat this fruit, they'll think I've insulted their gift. And if that happened, who knew if they might suddenly change their attitude and attack him? He didn't have many options at the moment. On one side, the mysterious fruit, and on the other, hundreds of goblins watching his every move. Oh Hyun Min took a deep breath. He grasped the fruit firmly in his hand. Now the decision was his alone. Would he trust this unknown fruit, or refuse to eat it out of fear and perhaps turn all those goblins into his enemies? Then he thought to himself, it is possible that this might be the last meal of my life. Then he cast aside all his hesitation. Come what may. With that, he took a large bite of the fruit. But the moment the fruit entered his mouth, his eyes suddenly widened. He was so astonished that he couldn't utter a word for a few seconds. Meanwhile, all the goblins held their breath, trying to read the expression on his face. They were afraid that their master might not like the fruit they had offered. Then, suddenly, a faint smile appeared on Oh Hyun Min's face. He exclaimed in amazement, How can this be so delicious? I have never tasted a fruit this delicious in my entire life. Upon hearing his words, all the goblins rejoiced. Relief and pride were clearly visible on their faces. After all, their master had accepted their first gift. But Oh Hyun Min did not yet realize that he hadn't merely eaten a fruit. Unknowingly, he had consumed the very thing that would change his destiny. As soon as Oh Hyun Min swallowed the first bite of the fruit, the entire cave suddenly erupted with cheers of joy. Long live our master! Long live the master! Goblins began jumping and celebrating as if a grand festival had just begun. Oh Hyun Min looked at them in astonishment and muttered, Wait, I've only taken a single bite. But the very next moment, a strange heat began to course through his entire body. He doubled over in pain and clutched his head. He felt as though something inside his body was changing. Panicked, he thought, no. Could this be because of that fruit? Before he could even make sense of it, suddenly, a transparent screen made of blue light appeared before his eyes. Oh Hyun Min's breath hitched. The screen displayed his full details: name, Oh Hyun Min, title, master, territory, Red Box Valley, population 47, and most shocking of all, A status window had opened before him, the kind he had previously only ever seen in video games. In that moment, Hyun Min realized perhaps he hadn't simply arrived in another world, but had actually become part of a living game himself. Hyun Min stared at the glowing blue screen. He blurted out instinctively, "What exactly is this?" "A hologram." He reached out, trying to touch the screen, but it remained floating in mid-air as if visible only to him. He began to read the information displayed on it carefully. Just then, his eyes fell upon a line of red text at the bottom. Only 4 days, 3 hours, and 58 minutes remain until the territory war begins. His heart skipped a beat. He muttered in a panic, "Why, is this timer running? And what exactly is a territory war?" He had never heard that term before. He was still grappling with these questions when suddenly, new words began to appear on the screen on their own. "Your question is being answered." Hyun Min's eyes widened. He looked around nervously. Who? Who is talking to me?" But there was no one there. Only that mysterious screen, which had started answering his questions. In that moment, he realized this was no ordinary system. It was listening to his every question and answering them just like a living intelligence. Hyun Min was still staring at that mysterious screen. Just then, a new word flashed upon it, wiki. He repeated it in astonishment. Wiki! The very next moment, he realized that the system was actually answering his questions. The screen stated that if he wished, he could access information about anything in this world with the help of wiki. But Hyun Min shook his head and said to himself, "No, let's put that aside for now. First, I need to know, where exactly am I?" He immediately asked that very question. A few seconds later, the screen flashed again. "Wiki will answer." Then the reply appeared, "This place is the demon realm." Upon reading this, the color drained from Hyun Min's face. What? The demon realm? His heart began to pound wildly. He couldn't fathom how an ordinary office worker had ended up in the world of demons. In a state of panic, he asked his next question, "Then how did I get here?" But the answer the system gave this time unsettled him even more. "Your current level is too low. Therefore, your exact location and the full details regarding it cannot be revealed at this time." Hyun Min fell completely silent for a few moments. For the first time, he realized merely surviving in this world wouldn't be enough. If he wanted to know the truth, he would first have to make himself much more powerful. Hyun Min pinched his cheek hard. The pain was absolutely real. He murmured softly, "No, this definitely isn't a dream." He sat in silence for a few moments, trying to calm his thoughts. Then he took a deep breath and said to himself, "All right. First, I need to understand the whole situation." He then asked the mysterious system, "If I want to go back to my own world, do I have to win the territory war?" A moment later, a single word appeared on the screen. "Correct." Upon receiving this answer, Hyun Min's expression turned serious. The path ahead was clear now. If he wanted to return home, he had to play by the rules of this strange world. Just then, his gaze fell upon the goblins standing before him. They were all looking at him quietly. The system's words suddenly echoed in his mind. "All of them are under your command." Hyun Min looked at the crowd of goblins in astonishment. For the first time, he realized that these monsters were not his enemies, but his first subjects. And now, the responsibility for them rested on his shoulders as well. Hyun Min took a close look at the goblins for the first time. Their gaunt bodies, sunken eyes, and frail faces clearly revealed that they had been starving for a long time. He muttered softly, "They look like victims of malnutrition?" He realized that if these were his subjects, their condition was dire. But then, another alarming question crossed his mind. He immediately called out to the system, "Wiki, if I lose this territory war, what happens?" Silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Then an answer appeared on the screen in red text. "There is a very high probability that you will die." Hyun Min's breath hitched for a moment, but the screen didn't stop there. The next message was even more terrifying. "If you lose the territory war, your territory will be seized, your subjects will be wiped out, and you yourself will die." Then a final warning appeared. "Every lord who has lost a territory war to date has met their death." Upon reading this, Hyun Min's face turned deathly pale. He let out a dry, hollow laugh, and then hanging his head, he simply said, "Unbelievable." After a moment of silence, only one word escaped his lips: "Damn." Now he understood it all too well. There was no reward for winning this game, but there was only one penalty for losing: death. Hyun Min let out a long sigh and muttered with a wry smile, "Whether it's the real world or this place, trouble follows me everywhere." Memories of his days at the office came flooding back. The same story every day. No budget, not enough staff, And on top of that, a workload so heavy that reports had to be finished by morning no matter what. He had toiled day and night, yet all he got in return was stress and exhaustion. Now as he looked at this new world, he realized that the situation here wasn't any different. Here too, he had weak subjects, limited resources, and the looming deadline of a life-or-death territory war hanging over his head. He chuckled softly and said, "To be honest, this world feels just like my old job." Then, turning serious, he called out to the system, "Wiki, I have one last question." Gazing at the screen, he asked, "If I keep developing my territory and continue raising my territory level, can I win this territory war?" He held his breath, for the answer to this question would determine his entire destiny. Oh Hyun Min took a deep breath. Only one question remained in his eyes now. He spoke softly. Can I ever go back home?" Silence hung in the air for a few moments. Then the system screen lit up. "Vicky will answer." The very next second, a single word appeared on the screen. "Possible." Upon reading this, a faint glimmer of hope appeared on Oh Hyun Min's face for the first time. But that joy was short-lived, because right beneath it, another message appeared. In history, only one person has ever managed to return to their own world after winning the first territory war. Oh Hyun Min remained silent for a moment, then he slowly bowed his head. That is enough for now. He didn't have all the answers yet. But he had certainly found a reason to move forward. He slowly rose to his feet. He looked out at the unfamiliar valley stretching before him and at his goblin kin. Then he said to himself, "So, I have only 4 days. 4 days to survive in this strange and unknown world and to prepare to win the first territory war." He knew, if he succeeded, perhaps one day he could return home. But if he made even a single mistake, his story would end forever in this mysterious world. Oh Hyun Min took a few steps forward and gazed at his subjects. Dozens of goblins stood before him, looking at him with eyes full of hope. He said to himself, "What exactly will this territory war be like? I have no idea yet. But one thing is certain." He took a deep breath. "I have only 4 days left." 4 days. In such a short time, he had to understand this entire place, prepare his subjects, and face a battle that meant certain death. Then he adjusted his tie and reminded himself of who he was. "I am Oh Hyun Min, age 33. The world's youngest manager who achieved this position through sheer hard work. He had handled countless impossible situations back at the office, and today, the greatest challenge of his life stood before him. He clenched his fist tightly and spoke in a firm voice, "I have no intention of dying here." Then, looking at all the goblins standing before him, he raised his voice and declared, "Listen, from now on, we will transform this place together. And at any cost, we will win this territory war." A faint smile suddenly appeared on Oh Hyun Min's face. Looking at his entire goblin clan, he spoke, "I have something important to tell you." Then he said with confidence, "People say that working overtime kills a person, but my life has taught me that working overtime can also work miracles." Silence fell over the area for a few moments. The goblins began looking at one another. They couldn't quite grasp what their new master was trying to say, but there was no longer any fear in Oh Hyun Min's eyes. All that could be seen was confidence and a fierce determination to win. He straightened his tie, took a step forward, and announced in a loud voice, "Starting tonight, we are all going to work overtime." His voice echoed throughout the valley. Oh Hyun Min cast his gaze around. Surrounded by towering cliffs, the valley looked like nothing less than a natural fortress. He mused to himself, if I'm not mistaken, there's only one entrance to this valley." His manager's instincts had kicked in once again. He began to view everything through the eyes of an enemy. Then he asked the system, "If someone were to attack our territory, which route would they take to get in?" A moment later, the screen lit up, but as always, he received the same reply. "Your level is insufficient for this information." Oh Hyun Min clutched his head in frustration. Then he grumbled, "Give me a break. Level too low for every single question." He took a deep breath and composed himself. "All right, if the system won't help, we'll have to use our own wits." He then looked toward the entire goblin army and spoke in a loud, commanding voice, "Everyone, listen up!" At the sound of his voice, all the goblins snapped to attention and turned their gaze toward him. Now, Oh Hyun Min was about to begin the very first war preparation meeting of his life. Oh Hyun Min led everyone to the narrow pass and carefully examined the towering cliffs on either side. Then, turning to his subjects, he spoke in a firm voice, "We will defend this pass, even if it costs us our lives." Hearing this, the goblins looked at one another. They couldn't quite grasp what plan their new master was devising, but a complete strategy was already taking shape in Oh Hyun Min's mind. Crouching down and sketching a map on the ground, he said, "From now on, everyone will have an assigned task. He pointed to 10 of the goblins standing before him. You 10, go ahead, find the largest boulders you can and roll them back here. The goblins were initially taken aback. It was likely the first time they had been ordered to gather stones instead of fighting. One goblin just stood there staring at him. Oh, Hyun Min immediately shouted, "If I'm speaking to you, don't just stand there. Get to work right away." The very next moment, all the goblins rushed off together. For the first time, they had found a leader who devised a plan instead of panicking. Oh, Hyun Min watched them go and thought to himself, they may lack raw combat strength, but if utilized correctly, they could become our greatest asset. Then, looking at the remaining goblins, he issued his next order in a loud voice. As for the rest of you, there is work for you too. Only 4 days remained until the war began, and the first military preparations for Red Rock Valley had officially commenced. Oh Hyun Min laid out his plan without wasting a single second. Pointing toward the high cliff, he said, "Gather every stone you find it. Don't leave a single one behind. Collect them all and pile them up at the top of that hill." Upon receiving the order, several goblins immediately began climbing the rocky terrain without a word of protest. Some picked up large boulders, while others busied themselves transporting them to the summit. Then, Oh Hyun Min turned to the other team and said, "You lot, start digging a deep trench right in front of this entrance." Raising his hand, he commanded loudly, "Get to work!" And just like that, all the goblins threw themselves into the task in unison. Oh Hyun Min was amazed by what he saw. He thought to himself, it's incredible. Not a single one of them is asking questions. They're simply doing exactly what I say without any argument. But he didn't just stand there issuing orders. He too knelt on the ground and began digging with his bare hands. He knew full well if the leader didn't put in the hard work himself, his team wouldn't give it their all either. Time slowly ticked by. Before long, evening fell, and the darkness of night blanketed Red Rock Valley. Yet the work didn't stop. A massive pile of stones began to form atop the cliffs. Down below, the trench near the entrance grew deeper, and sharpened wooden spears were driven into the ground around it. For the territory war taking place in 4 days, Oh Hyun Min's first line of defense was finally beginning to take shape. Oh Hyun Min rested his long spear on the ground and looked at all the soldiers standing before him. Satisfaction was clearly visible on his face. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "You have all worked very hard today." Oh Hyun Min glanced at everyone's conditions. Some had broken fingernails, others had badly scraped knees, and everyone's body was covered in injuries. Yet no one had given up. Just then, a blue system window suddenly appeared before Oh Hyun Min's eyes, trait activated overtime. Whenever the residents of this area work overtime, their efficiency increases by 15%. Hunger pangs will be reduced, and stamina consumption will decrease. Oh Hyun Min raised his eyebrows slightly at this. A new trait. At least now we have a ray of hope. He took a deep breath and fixed his gaze on everyone standing before him. We have absolutely no time to waste. We must make the most of every single second. Oh Hyun Min rested his spear on the ground and raised a hand, signaling everyone to quiet down. Rest for a while now, and listen to me carefully. All the goblins turned their gaze toward him in silence. Oh Hyun Min glanced around and spoke in a serious tone. We've made plenty of preparation since this afternoon, but to be honest, we still aren't fully ready. He paused for a moment and looked into everyone's eyes, and his voice grew firmer than ever. The real test is about to begin. Oh Hyun Min looked at everyone with a serious gaze. His voice echoed across the entire field. Do you know what overtime really means? The goblins began looking at one another. No one had the answer. Oh Hyun Min continued without pausing. Overtime means working tirelessly towards your goal even when the rest of the world is resting. Hearing his words, the expression of every goblin present turned serious. They were beginning to understand the path Oh Hyun Min wanted to lead them down. Night had deepened. The moon's cold light had spread over the mountains, yet Oh Hyun Min's voice still echoed in everyone's ears. The path we are about to choose will not be easy. It will be arduous and filled with pain. He gazed at the sky for a moment, then spoke in a firm voice. But remember, every single drop of sweat you shed today will become the price paid in our enemy's blood during the upcoming territory war. Oh Hyun Min raised his spear high into the air. His resounding voice echoed across the entire field. Soldiers! All the goblins immediately turned their gaze toward him. For the next 3 seconds, I want you to shout with all your might. A moment of silence fell, and then the entire area shook with their roars. Overtime! 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 The thunderous roar from thousands of throats bounced off the mountains, echoing repeatedly. A faint smile appeared on Oh Hyun Min's face. Excellent, that's the spirit I want. From now on, everyone works with everything they've got. No excuses, no slacking off. Upon receiving his command, the goblins rushed to their respective tasks without wasting a single moment. Some began hauling stones, while others set to work reinforcing the fortifications. Oh Hyun Min cast his gaze around. The place that had been quiet just moments ago was now filled with the clamor of activity and hard work. He smiled faintly and said to himself, "Wow, what a sight. It's just like an ant colony where everyone is busy with their work, never stopping." Oh Hyun Min surveyed his army closely. Some held nothing but a stone, others a small knife, and most lacked even a decent weapon. He thought to himself, Is this our entire fighting force? Are we to wage war with bare hands and a few makeshift weapons? For a moment, concern was clearly visible on his face, but the very next instant, a new gleam appeared in his eyes. If weapons are scarce, then we must fight with our wits. He studied the goblins standing before him. Though weak, their greatest strength was their unquestioning obedience to his every command. Just then, a strategy flashed through Hyun Min's mind. If they all move as a single team, their very weaknesses could become a strength. He drew a straight line on the ground and had everyone line up in front of him. From today, you will not fight alone. You will form a wall. The front rank will absorb the blows while the rear rank launches the attacks. No one is to leave their position, he continued. Victory in this war won't come from brute strength, but from discipline. Then he issued a command in a loud, clear voice. Everyone, stand in a straight line. The goblins immediately obeyed and fell into formation. Hyun Min nodded in satisfaction. Now I will teach you a battle formation that can make even a weak army invincible. The phalanx formation. Upon hearing this, the goblins looked at one another in astonishment. Phalanx? What is that? Phalanx formation. The goblins looked at one another. We don't know. Seeing their confusion, Hyun Min took a deep breath. This won't work. I need to teach you the basics first. What a line is, what a row is, everything from scratch. He called one goblin forward from the crowd and placed his hands on its shoulders. From today, you will set the example for everyone. The goblin straightened up nervously. Gesturing toward the rest, Hyun Min issued an order. Everyone, pay close attention. This is your reference point. Now everyone will take their positions behind and alongside him. No one is to break the line. For the first time, the goblins began to understand that battles are won not just with weapons, but with discipline and proper formation. And that very night, Hyun Min began training his ragtag group to transform them into a real army. Hyun Min looked at the goblins panting before him. Many had collapsed on the ground, others were trembling with exhaustion. For a moment, he recalled his old life, endless overtime at the office, ceaseless work, and pushing himself to the limit every single day. He said to himself, there is no other way now. If we stop here, everything ends right here. Then, clenching his fists, he shouted, don't stop! No matter what happens, we will survive! He issued another command. Once more, the goblins staggered to their feet. Again, once more. All night long, only one sound echoed. Again, get up! Don't break the line! Once more! Hyun Min saw a goblin slump down in exhaustion and spoke in a stern voice. Did you come here to play? Get up! There is still so much to learn! Startled, the goblin immediately stood up. Glancing at the entire group, Hyun Min said, if any of you still have even a shred of strength left, pour it all in. The coming battle will show no mercy. If you make a mistake even once, I will make you do that task 10 times over until it is done correctly. After hours of continuous training, the entire field began to quiet down. Just then, a small goblin, with a red cloth tied around its neck, made its way through the crowd and stopped gently in front of Hyun Min. It spoke in a nervous voice. Lord, Hyun Min crouched down before it. What is it? The small goblin remained silent for a moment. Its eyes held a mix of fear and hope. Then, hesitantly, it said, please, just give us some food. Hearing this, Hyun Min's expression changed. He suddenly realized that he had spent the entire night making them fight and train, yet he hadn't even thought about the most essential thing. I kept making them work without arranging for their food. He fell silent for a moment. Just then, the small goblin took his hand with an innocent smile and said, if we get food, we can stay alive too, Lord. Hyun Min was deeply moved by those innocent words. He gently stroked the goblin's head and made a silent vow. From now on, my primary responsibility is to ensure that you never go hungry. The innocent smile of the small goblin touched Hyun Min's heart. He let out a soft sigh. To be honest, I don't know how long I'll be able to keep you all alive. His gaze fell upon the scrawny goblins standing before him, armed only with spears, with hunger clearly etched on their faces. He spoke softly. But there is one thing I do know. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. If we keep sacrificing ourselves one by one to save our children, in the end, nothing will be left. A hush fell over the entire clearing. Unwavering determination shone in Hyun Min's eyes. That is why he planted his spear firmly into the ground. We will fight with all our might. His voice echoed off the surrounding rocks. And remember, in this war, we won't let a single one of our comrades die in vain. For the first time, hope replaced fear in the goblins' eyes. They gripped their spears tightly. Not a single child will die of hunger or by the enemy's sword. At these words, a renewed spirit surged across the faces of the entire group. They were now ready to fight, not just for themselves, but for their entire tribe and the generations to come. Hyun Min raised his voice with all his might. From this day on, no one will be able to take even a single blade of grass growing on our land away from us. His roar echoed across the entire field. We will protect everything, our land, our people, and our future. Upon hearing this, all the goblins raised their spears toward the sky and let out a thunderous roar. Just then, a glowing system window suddenly appeared before them. Territory War countdown. 3, 2, 1. For a moment, the entire area fell completely silent. The very next instant, a red warning screen flashed. The territory war has begun. At the same time, the ground began to shake violently. Thud! Rumble! Show! Deep cracks appeared in the rocks, and the earth shuddered. Hyun Min immediately gripped his spear tightly. He took a step forward and declared in a firm voice, "Everyone, take your positions so the real battle begins now!" Suddenly, terrifying screeches echoed from the other end of the cave. The very next moment, dozens of glowing yellow eyes appeared. Silence hung heavy all around. Hyun Min's entire goblin army stood lined up along both edges of a massive ravine. Every zombie stood ready at its post as if awaiting a single command. Hyun Min walked slowly to the center of the ravine, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. Suddenly, a terrifying shriek echoed from within the ravine. The very next moment, hundreds of monsters burst forth, tearing through the darkness. Their glowing eyes locked onto the undead army, and they charged toward them at full speed. Yet there wasn't a trace of panic on Hyun Min's face. Glancing at his army, he shouted a command. "Focus! No one attacks until those bastards are completely caught in the trap." Upon receiving the order, the entire goblin army stood perfectly still. Not a single one took a step forward. Meanwhile, the monsters, oblivious to the situation, kept rushing headlong toward that very trap, and a faint smile played on Hyun Min's lips. He knew. The real hunt was about to begin. Hyun Min watched the monsters charging toward him and muttered to himself, "Just a little longer." A few seconds later, he said to himself again, "Just a little bit more." At that moment, one of the monsters running in the lead sensed something amiss. Huh? But it was already too late. The entire pack of monsters, sprinting at full speed, reached the edge of the massive chasm. The very next instant, thud! One after another, the monsters lost their balance and began plunging into the deep ravine. Chaos erupted inside the chasm. Grah! What is happening here? The monsters at the back began to fall too, shoved over the edge by those in front before they could even comprehend the situation. Screams and the sounds of bodies colliding echoed all around. Some were falling on top of others, while some were being crushed underneath. One monster shouted in anger, "Ah! I told you there was a pit here!" And another snapped back at him, "Move, you idiot!" In mere moments, the chasm was filled with monsters, and this was the very moment Hyun Min had been waiting for. Hyun Min looked down at the goblins writhing in the pit, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Just as I thought. They are weak and pathetic, just like us." Confidence was clearly visible in his eyes. "Now, the hunt begins." He shouted the command, "Goblins, attack!" Suddenly, chaos erupted all around. "Arr! Let go of me. If only this hadn't been his fault." The goblins were tumbling over one another. Some were trying to escape while others shoved their own comrades aside. Watching this scene, Hyun Min spoke with a cold smile. "Go ahead. Scream as loud as you want. There is no one here to hear you." The very next moment, the goblin soldiers launched a ruthless attack on them. The goblins' agonized screams echoed throughout the pit, yet there was no trace of pity on Hyun Min's face, because for him, this wasn't merely a battle. It was the easiest way to make his army even more powerful. The goblins trapped in the pit were struggling with all their might to get out. They screamed and shoved one another, but the more they thrashed, the more entangled they became. Hyun Min watched the scene calmly and thought to himself, "Just as I expected, once more than half of them are trapped in this pit. Escaping will become impossible for them." His gaze swept across the entire pit. The goblins were now completely ensnared. A faint smile played on Hyun Min's lips. "I won't let them rot here forever. I'll keep them all reserved for myself." Moments later, he looked toward his army and shouted a command. "Now!" As his voice rang out, all the undead soldiers immediately sprang into action. Rain stones down on all the goblins trying to climb out of the pit. The very next instant, massive stones came crashing down from above onto the horde of goblins. Now there was no escape for them. Upon receiving Hyun Min's command, the undead soldiers stationed above began hurling massive stones down without pause. The goblins trapped in the pit screamed in panic, "Don't stop! Keep raining stones down on them!" But it was already too late. The very next moment, massive stones began crashing down onto the horde one after another. Thud! Arr! Many goblins were crushed instantly beneath the stones, while others scrambled about, writhing in agony. But the pit was so densely packed that there was nowhere left to escape. Stones kept raining down from above. With every impact, the screams grew even more intense. Some goblins tried to save themselves by shoving their comrades aside, only to have another massive stone crash down on them the very next moment. The entire pit echoed with screams, clouds of dust, and the sound of shattering stone. By now, the goblins realized the truth. They weren't fighting a battle. They had been completely ensnared in a death trap laid by Hyun Min. Another boulder crashed right into the midst of the horde. Agonized screams began to echo all around. Oh Hyun Min was watching it all closely. He thought to himself, just as I expected, these goblins can't even move as swiftly as they used to. He looked down at the writhing goblins and said with a faint smile, they must realize by now just how difficult it is to escape this trap. Meanwhile, inside the pit, some goblins were still trying to flee for their lives, but chaos reigned everywhere. Some were falling over one another while others were being crushed beneath the stones. Then Oh Hyun Min cast his gaze over the entire horde and said with a smile, it seems they've forgotten everything else now. He then looked toward his undead army and said in a calm voice, boys? Oh Hyun Min looked at his undead army and shouted a command, everyone, raise your spears! Upon receiving the order, all the undead soldiers simultaneously gripped their spears firmly. Then Oh Hyun Min thrust his hand forward and roared, advance! At his command, the entire undead army charged forward to attack. Gra! Within seconds, their spears began piercing the bodies of the goblins trapped in the pit. The goblins screamed in agony, but the assault did not stop. Spears rained down on them from every direction, and they were unable to retaliate no matter how much they wanted to. Oh Hyun Min was constantly controlling his army. Focus! Pull them back! At his command, the undead soldiers simultaneously pulled their spears back, ready to strike again with equal force the very next moment. The goblins were completely hemmed in within the pit. The goblin army was under a relentless barrage of spear thrusts. Not a single goblin had a moment to recover. Oh Hyun Min shouted loudly, don't give them a single chance. Keep attacking relentlessly. Then he issued the next command, target their weak points. Drive your spears right through them. Upon receiving the order, the entire undead army surged forward in unison. Advance! Spears tore through the goblins' bodies one after another. Thrust! With every strike, the goblins screamed in agony. Yet they had neither the space to flee nor the opportunity to launch a counterattack. Without pausing, Oh Hyun Min commanded again, advance! The undead soldiers continued to eliminate the enemy with perfect coordination. In moments, the entire pit echoed with the agonized screams of the goblins. And Oh Hyun Min's strategy appeared to be a complete success. Standing above, Oh Hyun Min calmly watched the entire scene unfold. A faint smile played on his lips. Good. Everything is proceeding exactly according to plan. He looked down at the writhing goblins and thought to himself, we keep attacking and then immediately retreating. That is precisely why they are unable to launch a counterattack from the front. We have seized complete control of the battle's momentum. Down in the pit, the goblin army relentlessly repeated the same tactic. They would advance, strike with their spears, and then instantly fall back. The goblins were unable to retaliate no matter how much they wanted to. Watching his army, Oh Hyun Min said with satisfaction, if this pace continues, then the outcome of this battle is certain. But just then, his gaze suddenly fell upon a corner of the pit. Amidst the darkness, a massive figure slowly rose to its feet. Grrr! As it rose, the nearby goblins turned towards it in alarm. The very next moment, a heavy footstep landed on the ground. Then another. The presence of that colossal monster transformed the entire atmosphere. Then a low sound escaped its maw. Kra! And the very next instant, it lifted its head and let out a roar so powerful that the entire valley reverberated. Everyone's attention was instantly drawn to it upon hearing that roar. It seemed the true enemy had now entered the fray. Suddenly, that mysterious monster let out a terrifying roar. Roar! Its roar was so powerful that the entire battlefield shook. Oh Hyun Min, standing above, immediately turned his gaze toward it. The very next moment, the colossal monster lunged forward with lightning speed. In mere seconds, it reached right in front of the goblin soldiers. Without wasting a moment, it swung its massive arm and struck with full force. In just an instant, the entire atmosphere of the battle had shifted. Oh Hyun Min realized that standing before him was no ordinary goblin, but the most dangerous warrior of the entire army. The massive goblin glared at Oh Hyun Min and roared, you wiped out my entire tribe! You're no ordinary human, I recognize you! Just then, a system window appeared before him. Ruler of Black Hill, Hobgoblin Lord! Oh Hyun Min studied his face closely. Then, a faint smile played on his lips. So, you're the leader of all these goblins, so... But before he could even finish speaking, the Hobgoblin Lord roared in anger. Enough chatter! Lifting his massive weapon, he shouted, do you have no regard for your own life? Then he bellowed, silence! Don't let these small fry get in our way. This battle will be decided by the two leaders alone. Hearing this, Oh Hyun Min fell silent for a moment. He looked at him in surprise. What? He couldn't quite grasp what the Hobgoblin was trying to say. Looking into the Hobgoblin Lord's eyes, Oh Hyun Min spoke in a calm voice, you and I... face to face? A cruel smile spread across the Hobgoblin Lord's face. Do you really have that much courage? Oh Hyun-min continued to look at him without a trace of fear. Then, with a faint smile, he replied, "To be honest, no." At those words, the Hobgoblin Lord swung his massive weapon and attacked Oh Hyun-min with all his might. But Oh Hyun-min was already prepared. He stepped back and said in a calm voice, "Don't be so impatient. I thought the Lord of Black Hill would be a bit more sensible." Upon hearing this, anger became clearly visible on the Hobgoblin Lord's face. Gritting his teeth, he said, "I expected far more from you." Then, clenching his fist, he declared, "That was just an opening strike. Now fight me with everything you've got and die." The Hobgoblin Lord lunged at Oh Hyun-min with all his might. But just then, crash. A massive boulder came crashing down right onto his head. The Hobgoblin Lord writhed in pain. Enraged, he looked up and roared, "Stop throwing these rocks at me, wow, you cowards!" But his roar had no effect. The very next moment, not just one, but dozens of massive boulders began raining down on him from above. The Hobgoblin Lord tried to fend them off, but the barrage of rocks only intensified. Crash, crash, crash. The sound of falling rocks echoed all around. He was now forced to use all his strength just to protect himself. Just then, Oh Hyun-min looked at him with a calm gaze and said with a smile, "Yeah, I prepared these too." In other words, Oh Hyun-min had laid a separate trap for the Hobgoblin Lord as well. Oh Hyun-min surveyed the battlefield and said with a faint smile, "I didn't think conquering this territory would be so easy." Just then, a red system window appeared before him. "Congratulations! You have won the territory war." Upon reading the system message, a look of satisfaction spread across Oh Hyun-min's face. He looked toward his goblin army and called out loudly, "Everyone did a great job!" Then, raising his fist in the air, he triumphantly declared, "We won!" At his words, the entire goblin army erupted in cheers. The sounds of victory echoed all around. In this first major battle involving the goblins, Oh Hyun-min's strategy proved completely successful, and he secured control over the entire territory without engaging in a direct confrontation. The battle was over. The groans of wounded goblins echoed all around. Just then, one goblin managed to push itself up from the ground. Upon seeing this, a goblin soldier shouted loudly, "There's one still alive!" The other soldiers immediately advanced, pointing their spears at it. "Finish it off!" The wretched goblin began to retreat in fear. It realized there was no hope left for survival. But then, Oh Hyun-min shouted a command. "Stop!" At the sound of his voice, all the undead soldiers halted in their tracks. They looked at him in astonishment. Huh? All eyes were now on Oh Hyun-min. They couldn't understand. Why had he stopped them from killing the last surviving goblin? An undead soldier mustered the courage to ask, "You were about to kill that goblin, so why did you let it go?" Another chimed in, "Why?" Then yet another soldier voiced his concern, "If we leave it alive, it will just attack us later. They are always pestering us." But Oh Hyun-min immediately shook his head and said, "No!" Pointing at the wounded goblin, he said, "Don't kill it. Right now it would just become a corpse." Then Oh Hyun-min looked at his entire army and said in a calm yet firm voice, "Let it live, because right now, it is a resource for us." Peace returned to the entire area once the battle ended. Oh Hyun-min stood amidst his newly conquered territory, intently observing the system window open before him. He smiled faintly and said, "Let's see what we've gained from this battle." Just then, the system began displaying a series of notifications. Territory level increased. Level rose from 1 to 2. Following that, the next message appeared. Current territory residents, 47. New residents from the conquered territory, 213. Total residents, 260. Oh Hyun-min looked at the entire army with a sense of satisfaction. But the system didn't stop there. Another reward appeared on his screen. Resources acquired. Obtained dried meat fruit and 10 monster pieces of old leather. Then another system message emerged. The threat trait can now be utilized. Its effect has been enhanced. Its potency is now slightly greater than before. And finally, the system announced, since your territory's level has increased, all residents of your territory will evolve rapidly. Furthermore, all creatures within this territory will now remain under the dominion of the undead overlord. Reading these messages brought a faint smile to Oh Hyun-min's face. He realized this victory wasn't just about capturing a single area, it was a triumph that would elevate the strength of his entire undead empire to the next level.